Welcome, everybody, to the Cultivate E.D.H podcast. I'm Cam, and today we've got two very special guests. We've got SleepyShaman and Dimarx, two very good friends of the podcast. And today we're going to be breaking down a very controversial topic that has risen in the EDH community recently. Should C-EDH separate from EDH? And of course, this was prompted by the banning of Flash during the last banned and restricted announcement. So let's just dive right into it. Dimarx, can you start us off with the Flash banning as the catalyst?
So, the Flash banning has been something that the C-EDH community has kind of been asking for a little while. It only got worse because Thassa's Oracle was printed. It made the combo even easier, and you could take out a lot of unnecessary slots that you would have in previous Hulk piles for just Thassa's Oracle. And then the Breakfast Hulk combination, which is Nomad's Encore and Cephalid Illusionist. So it just kind of compacted that all into one search, so you didn't have to have multiple Hulks or multiple pieces beyond the first search.
So it really seems like the reason Flash was banned was because of this. It was really, you couldn't really interact with it. It was super hard. You could go off as easily as turn 2, is it?
I mean, you could go off as easily as turn 1, but the thing is, interacting with it is very hard because it's trigger based. It's not like casting a spell. Like normal Thassa's Oracle, when you cast it, is not as much of an issue as it going off at instant speed with no interaction besides a stifle effect.
So the Flash banning as a whole, I assume everybody's pretty in the C-EDH community at least is pretty happy about the Flash banning.
God, we love it. The last about 3 weeks at the time that we're recording this has been an interesting time. We're seeing stacks decks return to the format because you can't really stack out a deck that only needs to cast one spell to win. So that has been a beautiful thing to see. We've been seeing a lot of different shifts in the format that I think is really healthy for it. So we're excited.
So let's now introduce this question of, because this Flash banning seemed like it was, the rules committee almost didn't want to do it because, again, C-EDH is kind of the minority of the player base. It was almost as if they didn't want to do it, but there was so much outcry for it that they just did it. And it's kind of prompted this question of, should the competitive players break off from the casual players where we create the divide between C-EDH and regular EDH?
Yeah, that has been brought up a little bit. I think that's a very big question, honestly. We could theoretically separate the minority from the larger group, but I think that could probably have a lot of issues. And I think a lot of the C-EDH community as a whole feels that way. I think it's more of the rules committee and the commander advisory group, also known as the CAG, did not quite understand how big of an issue it was. I think it was more of a communication between the lines rather than an issue with them needing to appease a minor subset.
So the issue with C-EDH and EDH, the split that we're talking about here would be, number one, it would kind of cause friction between this generalized ranking system that we've come around. The Channel Fireball released it a couple months ago, and it was for the commands. It was the command zone guide for Magic Fests, and it was a solidified number scale of well, if your deck fits here, then you can then identify your deck as a 3 or a 4, a 5, or a 6, and then you can then try to find other people whose decks fall within that range and presumably have a fair and balanced game against them. Now, Sleepy, I know that you're a very large proponent of the command zone guide, the ranking system as a whole.
I think it's a very, very solid guide, and it's the best one that I've seen so far. One of the bigger problems that Commander players have are being able to sit down at a table and then having an evenly placed match where almost everybody has a chance to win. That was one of the reasons that I started playing Commander, was that and the multiplayer aspect of it.
So, Demarx, you being the competitive player, do you foresee if this great split were to happen between the two of them? How do you think it affects like the unification of the ranking system, where we finally have been talking about this like system of numbers for it seems like years now? We finally get a solidified block set. This is what these look like. Do you think it kind of like cuts it off at the top end? So maybe somewhere between like 7 and 10 is now considered competitive EDH, and then it's now we have to rank our casual decks on like 1 to 6. How do you think that kind of works?
That's a big question because I think the guidelines as they put out are pretty good. They're open for interpretation, which is where certain things can kind of fall apart. But for the most part, they're, like Sleepy said, the absolute best we've seen so far. I think the issue of if this split were to happen is you're going to come into different people who just want to play EDH, whether the C-EDH community, if they were to split off, needed to rename themselves or something like that to become their own separate entity. You would have different ban lists for each. So I don't really think the 7 to 8 optimized or the 9 to 10 competitive, like the command zone guidelines are set out, are really going to change in theory because you could still have people building these decks. The issue is finding players to play in those spheres, which is why I think the split might not be in the best interest of both parties.
So it seems kind of like right now we're tentatively 1 point for the side of against the split versus so like a 1 to 0 type thing in favor of not splitting the two. So let's get into like a hypothetical here. If they were to separate, how would they separate if it were even possible?
I I think the biggest thing would be a difference between a ban list, and I know that the argument to keep the two the same is to have a unified ban list so that the two can play together. But the casual and competitive that I'm talking about, both have very different needs. So the first step, different ban list, but that obviously just that makes the divide between the two.
So if we kind of go down the hypothetical route like you were saying, Cam, we would need a lot more like of our public facing community, the higher end C-EDH YouTube channels like the Spike Feeders and a couple of others. They would have to create essentially their own rules committee. And from what we've heard from all of them, they're not really interested in that. They like playing the Commander game. So I think that would be a big driving force is we would have to have that desire from our larger community members to really push the whole community as a whole to separate, as it were. So that's kind of where that would be, I think.
So it's not impossible, it's just not very likely that we're going to ever see this kind of split between the two player bases.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's not impossible. I think it would be very difficult for at this point for anybody to split off. I mean, we've seen subsections of Commander kind of split off before, like Tiny Leaders and Brawl to some extent. Things like that kind of like pop up and then like kind of go to the wayside. I'm sure there are people who still play those formats and like those formats, but as a whole, Commander has remained the same.
Those formats are also larger rules differentiate, like differentials, if
Yeah,
I'm
and I
saying that
think
right.
yeah, I think that's the biggest proponent of them is they are easier to understand on a fundamental level because they are so vastly different. The difference between splitting up the C-EDH community and the EDH community would be one of like a very minor tweak in just the ban list.
So, again, staying in this hypothetical realm, because it almost seemed, well, again, like you said, Demarks, the whole it this flash ban kind of stemmed from a lack of understanding. It seems that we need to have a more fluent and open-ended connection with the rules committee and the CAG so that they understand the issues that are going on within the C-EDH community. If a card like Flash were to ever come up again, do you think that would maybe force the separation? Because maybe thinking about it, like maybe they didn't want to ban it, even if we take out the whole argument that it was a lack of communication and there wasn't like a very clear line for C-EDH players to voice their frustrations to the rules committee and to the CAG. If we kind of take that argument out, let's say another Flash comes along, not exactly the same card, but another Flashlight card that causes so many problems within the format. Are we more likely to see the split then if this becomes kind of like, well, you banned Flash, can you help us out again?
Um, I think that comes down from what Wizards of the Coast really wants. It's a lot easier for them to print a card like Protean Hulk than it is for them to print a card like Flash again, just because Flash is so specific. Is it possible that they print another one? Yes. Do I think it's likely? No. But if we go down the hypothetical that they do print one, I think the rules committee as a whole would probably be more open to banning it at this point. We'll have to see, see what happens, see if this hypothetical plays out, and who knows, we might have a split. Do I think this would cause a split? It depends on the card. If it's the same 2 mana instant, put a creature from your hand, pay or sacrifice, then that's going to cause a lot of issues. If it's at sorcery speed, I think a lot more people are like willing to be open to trying it because sorcery speed is a lot easier to mess with than instant speed. You don't have to hold up as much mana and things like that. So you can play a little more aggressive into those things.
I also know that with the flash banning, I think it was Sheldon himself that put out the notice and the discussion that they had about it, and that if something like Flash were to come up again in the C-EDH community, would have a problem like this. Maybe that they would try to like keep an eye on it, but don't expect something from it.
Kind of
Yeah.
like a we helped you out once. If the problem arises again, it's kind of on you to solve it the next time.
They didn't want to set a precedent that whenever C-EDH had a problem, that it wouldn't be their issue to deal with.
So we've kind of seen the whole the speed at which the Flash ban happened. Demarks, tell me, like, how long has Flash exactly been a problem in C-EDH?
I mean, I'm a little bit newer to following it super closely. I did follow it a little bit before and after Protean Hulk got unbanned, but I didn't build a CDH until CEDH deck, sorry, until you know last year, the year before, somewhere around there. So I'm fairly new to playing in that environment, but I'm very comfortable with like watching that environment. So it's been an issue for a while. It just wasn't as concise as it has been. We had to have cards that were like Zulaport Cutthroat, which isn't exactly ideal, or a Kozilek, an 11, mana costed card just to shuffle up the library and get filtering through again. So it wasn't as compact, I would say. So it's been an issue for a long time. The Flash Hulk decks have always been good for as long as they've been around, and they've probably even been up at the top for as long as they've been around. They came into play really when Thrasios and Timna got reprinted, because then you had all of the colors you needed and you didn't have to run a fifth color, even though you still can. Najila was a Flash Hulk deck. There were a couple of other ones that kind of sprung up as well.
So the flash banning was also tied to the banning of another card, Lutri the Spell Chaser, which is the companion mechanic, a whole different monster that we won't get into. But it was banned fairly quickly because they immediately realized it was a problem.
I think it was banned like an hour after it was revealed.
Yeah,
That
like right after it was revealed. So if we're looking at the speed of the ban between how long Flash Hulk really became a problem to like how this one card was kind of going to ruin like the diversity of all these different decks in Commander essentially, thusly why it was banned like an hour after it was previewed. Does the speed of the ban play any part in like the future of C-EDH? So if another card gets printed that is maybe as enabling as Flash, do you think that they're more likely to act on it, kind of like how they did with Lutri?
The rules committee, as we've stated in the past, have made it a little apparent that this was something that they did for us and that we shouldn't expect it again. That, as a whole, we have taken with a thank you for doing this for us. We're very happy with it. We, right now, don't have a need to have anything else banned, we feel, and everything's pretty hunky dory. So I wouldn't be surprised if they sat on it for a while if something were to come out like that. And I think that everybody in the C-EDH community expects the exact same.
I in my personal opinion, in this hypothetical, I think if anything is likely to drive a wedge between the two groups, between C-EDH and regular EDH, it is kind of this continuing of pushed products that we've been seeing ever since uh, I can't think of the name of it now. It came out last summer. The modern set that
Oh, Modern
Modern Horizons. I don't know why I kept thinking Modern Masters, and I'm like, that's not it. Modern. It really kind of like started with Modern Horizons with cards like Urza, um, the first Sliver, amongst Force of Negation, amongst others, and then we kind of started to see this snowball effect in Throne of Eldraine with Oko. Even though Oko's not banned in Commander, it's banned almost everywhere else. And then we kind of see it start to snowball even further into Theros Beyond Death, where we have Thassa's Oracle and Underworld Breach. And now we're at this point where we're in Ikoria slash C2020, and it just kind of seems like this snowball is going to keep rolling. So it almost seems inevitable that there is going to be another card that is going to cause problems like Flash did.
I have something to say about Oko. I don't think it was partly. It's a multi-step problem amongst wizards, but it was the playtesters that did it. One of them even admitted to it on a MTG Arena stream where they said that they had used it purely like offensively, turning their own stuff into elks and then swinging in. They never, for some reason, they never even thought about turning their opponent's stuff into elks. So it's I feel like wizards might need better playtesters as well.
And that
But
could
it's
certainly be part of it.
and to be fair though, they probably do have a rather small pool of players there, and once a product gets out into the masses, cards that they might not have expected obviously mutate into problems.
Yeah, and and it's this like snowball effect that it just really kind of seems inevitable that there is going to be a card like Flash, not maybe not in the near future, next 2, 3, 4 years, but maybe somewhere down the line where we get another Protean Hulk esque piece, and then we maybe get another Flash esque piece that gets up to that same level.
And it's as Demarx was saying before, I think before we started recording, but it is more likely for them to print something like Protean Hulk. It's almost 90% more likely that that happens as just a very pushed card.
Yeah, and it's this like series of pushed products that we've seen, which kind of like scares me a little bit because I don't necessarily want the C-EDH players to separate from EDH. I don't really think it's that valuable to just say no, you go away and solve your own problems. I don't think that's productive. I don't think that's really good for the base as a whole because Commander is just such a flexible format where you can play super highly competitive or you can play super low to the ground casual. It's just that my worry is that something like this comes up again. Maybe it's not even like a flashlight card. Maybe it's some combo that we don't even know about yet. Some card that interacts in some way, and we just kind of get a problem like Flash. Maybe not necessarily like with a Flash like effect where you're cheating out the Protean Hulk on turn one, but maybe something that reaches that level again that would cause the separation or the C-EDH players to maybe get fed up with the rules committee for not taking action quick enough.
I think the easiest thing to point at is that Flash is a card that is very unsuspecting of how good it is. Whereas a lot of the things that have been banned in the past, like when we were talking a little bit before we started recording about Paradox Engine, that card is inherently good for literally every tier. This combination just happened to be very, very good for the competitive side. So I think we are more likely to see something that is very, very good for the rest of the group as a whole and maybe not competitive, or we're likely to see something that is good for literally every tier. And then that is something that the rules committee would probably reach out and ban.
Yeah, certainly because if it's affecting every single tier, which the majority of tiers fall in the casual, not competitive, so they're more likely to act on something that affects the majority rather than the minority.
Which I think is perfectly fine and reasonable in most situations.
Especially in the case of Paradox Engine, where if the lowest of the low casual decks can abuse it, then clearly there's a problem. Because it really, a card like Paradox Engine, it shouldn't be hard for a hyper competitive deck like a Flash Hulk deck to abuse Paradox Engine.
Yeah, or something like it. We had a deck in the competitive community when Paradox Engine was around called PST, which is Paradox Scepter Thrasios. And that deck is still around even after the ban because we realized that cards like Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact are just really good. So we adapt and we found a very simple thing and found an even better thing after the banning. So it's one of those things that we're going to find the cards. It's just a matter of time, but the issues that arise from them are much less than what we were seeing with Flash. Because the issue with Flash is if you're not playing Flash, you have to play something that stops Flash. It's kind of like when Modern banned a Splinter Twin. If you weren't playing Splinter Twin, you needed to play a deck that stopped Splinter Twin.
It requires the you have to have this card in your hand turn one because if the Flash Hulk player has it, then they're just gonna win on turn one, and that really kind of ruins the deck diversity in a way because it requires all the other players to be running this one card that attempts to stop the Flash Hulk player more so than like what the competitive environment already, it's like it's a lot of interaction anyway, but you have to like take it then that step farther.
It doesn't even have to be turn one. That's the fastest it can happen, but it's just an inevitability with especially with Timna. Timna and Thrasios together make games a little inevitable that you'll find the things you're looking for. So you get into this point where even if it's a slow, grindy game, that Timna Thrasios player is probably eventually going to get Flash and Hulk in their hand at some point.
So we've mentioned Thrasios and Tibna a little bit. Some other cards that have exacerbated the problem that we have, like Thassa's Oracle. What was Thassa's Oracle kind of the nail in Flash's coffin when it was released? That kind of like reaffirmed that like, okay, this card's really causing a problem now, more so than it was before.
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, Thassa's Oracle is a great card. I like the card. It, replaces Laboratory Maniac in a lot of decks. It's a good card. The problem is that it was 2 mana and it fit perfectly into that little Breakfast Hulk combo that I talked about a little bit earlier, where you need Nomad's Encore and Cephalid Illusionist to mill out your whole deck at instant speed with Thassa's Oracle trigger on the stack to win the game. So it became this sort of, I can cut out all this other nonsense for this one combo and it'll still work great.
So do you see a future or maybe a possibility where we see some other pushed cards like Underworld Breach, where we see this super pushed card that might not be causing a problem now, but could be causing a problem far down the line with whatever they might print?
I mean, it's possible. The thing with Underworld Breach is has been kept in check really well. It's a very good card, and it makes me happy as a Storm player because it just fuels that fire. But there are things like Dranister Magistrate from the newest set, I think, or Dranith Magistrate, I'm sorry, that stops you from casting spells outside of anywhere but your hand. So that just puts a damper on Underworld Breaches. There are going to be cards that always have these foils to them. And
Not
there were a couple for Protean Hulk, but not as consistent as it was for Protean Hulk to get there, as it were.
not to mention with Underworld Breach, since it uses the graveyard as the main resource, it's easily checked by Grave Hate.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas like some of these other combos like the Flash Hulk combo aren't easily checked by these other things where Sleepy, you can't just Bajuka Bog me and then, well, now my Underworld Breach doesn't work. It doesn't really work the same way with Flash Hulk.
Yeah.
Not in the same way. There were cards that did it. I'm trying to think of the one now. The white cleric lady who stopped things from coming into play unless they were cast. Let me pull it up.
So maybe is the answer maybe more like taxation effects, kind of like Dranith Magistrate, where it's maybe the answer is if Wizards prints more of these tax cards, or maybe just tax decks in general. Maybe it's just that this is the world we're living in now, where these decks are just the direct counter to it. So if you know somebody's playing it, you better either have somebody else at the table who's playing a prison style deck to shut down the other player.
The problem that we were seeing is that, and I found the card. One of them is Aven Mind Sensor, which just lets you search the top 4, and the other one is Containment Priest, which exiles things if they wouldn't enter the battlefield unless they were cast. The problem with that is they weren't fast enough. So the problem with Flash is that it outpaced the Stacks decks, which were supposed to check them, like with any combo deck.
So maybe what are some other cards that exacerbated the problem of Flash, for example?
If we exacerbated in what way?
Like really started like, so let's say Protean Hulk gets unbanned. What was it, like 4 years ago or something? Protean Hulk gets unbanned, and then they start to like print different cards that might have made problems in other formats, and then started to work their way into Commander, and maybe made the Flash Hulk decks better. Like I can think of one, Veil of Summer, that maybe made it easier for the Flash Hulk decks to protect their pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a bunch of situations like that. We have like modular spells are being very popular in the past year, with cards like Drown in the Lock because it's so versatile. A lot of blue-black decks are changing out counterspell for it in the higher tiers because we fill up our graveyard so much with fetches and things like that. I mean, there are countless cards that like added just tiny little bits of value to these decks. I think a major driving force was something that happened in that same year or the year before when they printed companions. I mean, or not companions, I'm sorry, partners. All the weird rules text coming back to bite me. The partners decks that came in the 2016, 2017, somewhere in that range.
16, yeah,
Right.
2016.
Okay. Like one of those two. The decks that had all the partners in them were good in their own sense, just from the partners being in them, and then a couple of the commanders that were also in them. So it's the ideal of adding more colors to our options, like the 4-color commanders, and in turn the 2-colored partners that can pair with each other to make 4, just opens up many more options and can allow things to become broader and more based on how many colors you have access to rather than how focused you are on certain things, if that makes sense. I don't think I phrased it quite right.
Well, it really just seems like some of these cards that maybe made it worse for the C-EDH players. I don't really see Veil of Summer all that often as a casual player. I don't see Drown in the Lock. I maybe see a Dovin's Veto. I personally run Underworld Breach because it's just a really good card, whether you're playing competitively or not. And then there's other cards like Jace Wielder of Mysteries, which is just another lab man. And then I have run into like Narset Parter of Veils, which is one of the cards we talked about before recording. I think that maybe this whole broad umbrella of the topic of should C-EDH separate from EDH, I feel as though a lot of these cards don't cause problems for us casuals, but I don't necessarily think that that means we shouldn't do something about it if it's causing problems for the minority of players, which would be the C-EDH players.
I think so too. We don't see a whole lot of these combos as casual players, but we also have to keep in mind that we usually just play at our local game store and we don't really branch out into other pods. So we're operating in like our own little meta, and we just don't have a whole lot of competitive people to play with. Not to say that the people that we play with don't make good decks, because they do, and they make strong decks, but like we have more of a battle cruiser esque meta, and I know that personally Dimarx is regarded as kind of a boogeyman type character, that when they come with their combo decks, people are like, all right, cool. So we just have to keep in mind that these competitive combos, we just don't really see them very often in our own meta. Not to, and that's not to mention that with that these combos might be more prevalent at other local game stores near us.
It really harkens back to the fact that like uh, one of the probably biggest reasons in favor of Flash getting banned was is that it really didn't see play a lot outside of the competitive environment. You know, maybe somebody was running a Flash Hulk combo just as a like I win the game button when the game's going too long, and you can just Flash Hulk and you can win. But again, we didn't really see that a ton. So I'm really in favor of doing everything that we can to stop or to prevent a separation of the C-EDH community from the EDH community, because I do think that they are a valuable part of this community. The commander is such an expressive format that you should be able to play it at the lowest or the highest power levels that you want to play it at, or in the middle if that's what you're into. And banning, I'm a proponent of, if a card is causing problems in C-EDH, I'm okay with putting it on the ban list. It's when maybe that card maybe like Soul Ring, because obviously Soul Ring's played in every commander deck and in a lot of competitive decks, I assume. It's something like that. I'm like, oh well, I don't really know if we should ban that. But if like Flash is causing a problem in C-EDH, then yeah, go ahead and ban it. I'm not really worried about the ban list uh, according, getting more cards added to it, like racking up a higher body count, because usually it's for a good reason. Like Paradox Engine, kind of like how we highlighted Paradox Engine earlier, it was for a good reason.
So I want to talk a little bit because if we take Flash for its just base value, put something into play, we can use a card like Nyx Bloom Ancient to then very easily, with what, 3 mana, 3 lands, you have a just a triple mana outlet. So I think viewing Flash as just a card that affected C-EDH is not quite right, with the creep that we've been seeing a little bit with more like standard lines of EDH play. It will start to affect. I think these cards that are seen at the highest level can start to bleed into all the lower tiers. It's something that just hasn't been explored as much.
I think that really lends itself to the whole issue that like maybe a card like Flash does need to be banned because maybe it is just a little too powerful, not necessarily like um, Paradox Engine powerful where it hits all the tiers, but it's like, well, if we would have gotten rid of Protean Hulk, again, like we said earlier, they're more likely to print another Protean Hulk than another Flash. So if you just get rid of Protean Hulk, and then, well, what if I'm just cheating in Nyx Bloom Ancient and then going wild on my mana there? Maybe I Thrasios mill put my entire deck into my hand, and then I win from there. So overall, it seems that the general consensus is that we should probably do as much as we can without overextending ourselves to keep the CEDH community within the bounds of the regular EDH community. Keep the ranking system intact where we're not kind of like cutting it off at 7 and then making them make their own ban list and jump through all of the complicated hoops that they would have to jump through in order to separate from our community and then go make their own thing. It's not really fair to them.
No, not at all. Um, at the end of the day, we want to play with people. We want to play Magic, and the more people that we can play Magic with, the better.
Exactly. I think that's where we'll call it today, everybody. Let us know on Twitter, comments of YouTube. Do you think that CEDH should separate from EDH? Should we kind of bail them out again if there's ever a Flash esque ban that they need? If we ever have to come put the fire out again, what do you guys think? Let us know, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.